Do not cover their guilt or let their sin be erased from your sight, because they have angered the builders. So we rebuilt the wall until the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, where the people had the will to keep on working. Everyone say the people had the will. When Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabs, Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the repair to the walls in Jerusalem was progressing and the gaps were being closed, they became furious. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and throw it into confusion. So we prayed to our God and stationed a guard because of them day and night. In Judah, it was said, the strength of the laborer fails, since there is so much rubble. We will never be able to rebuild the wall. And our enemy said, they won't realize it until we're among them, and can kill them and stop the work. When the Jews who lived nearby arrived, they said to us time and again, everywhere you turn, they attack us. So I stationed behind the lowest sections of the wall, at the vulnerable areas, and I stationed them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After I made an inspection, I stood up and said to the nobles, officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the great and awe-inspiring Lord, and fight for your countrymen, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. Your wives and your homes. When our enemies heard that we knew their scheme and that God had frustrated it, every one of us returned to his own work on the wall. From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half held spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers supported all the people of Judah who were rebuilding the wall. The laborers who carried the loads worked with one hand and held a weapon with the other. Each of the builders had his sword strapped around his waist while he was building, and the trumpeter was beside him. Then I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is enormous and spread out. We are separated far from one another along the wall. Wherever you hear the trumpet sound, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So we continued the work, while half the men were also holding spears from daybreak until the stars came out. At that time, I also said to the people, let everyone and his servants spend the night inside Jerusalem, so that they can stand guard by night and work by day. And I, my brothers, my servants, and the men of the guard with me never took off our clothes. Each carried his weapon, even when washed. So now, we get to the opposition. Alright? We see that Nehemiah was able to gather the people. They're building the wall, and they're just about halfway through. And Sanballat, who was showing opposition. Remember, the Samaritans, like Sanballat, they have a vested interest in preventing the temple from resuming its activities. Because as we studied, shortly before this all happened, the Samaritans, under the authority of Cyrus, he was able to build the temple as well. They were able to build their own temple on Mount Gerizim. And they had that vested interest that if they could prevent the progress of the Jews, then perhaps people would lend more legitimacy to the Samaritans, right? Even though they were backslidden and doing the wrong thing. And so Sanballat, Tobiah, the rest of them, they were against the Jews doing these things. I want you to pay attention to the way that they mock the Jews. All right? So first, he mocks the Jews, not directly in front of the Jews, but behind closed doors. All right? It says he mocked the Jews before his colleagues and the powerful men of Samaria. All right? So when it comes to that, what we need to see there is that just in the same way that we understand that God is working behind the scenes, even when we don't see it, just like with the story of Balaam and the donkey. You should also understand that just because the enemy presents himself as an angel of light in front of you, as an ally, as a foe, that doesn't necessarily mean, well, it almost certainly means also that behind closed doors, he's against you. And it doesn't mean that just because someone seems like they're on your side, if they have not committed to your God, there's a very big chance that behind closed doors, they're very much talking against you. Right? We really have to be aware of this. Sometimes we're tempted, as believers, but simply as humans, that the people that we ally ourselves with, that the people that we seek to work with, are just simply the people that we like the most, the people that we get along with the most. But it's really important that when we look for people who we yoke ourselves together, remember, we as humans were not meant to work alone. When Adam was created, God said, it's not good for man to be alone. I will make a helpmeet suitable for him. So that means each of us, as we enter into a work, whatever goal we have, whether it's our studies, whether it's building a family, whether it's our actual career, no matter what it is, we are called to work with others, right? And then, of course, there's some that we work with, but there's also those that we really ally ourselves with and we strengthen each other with, just like iron sharpens iron, and we yoke ourselves with. We suffer with together, we do all of these things together, we hand our burdens to them, and it's so important that these people that you trust the most, that you ally yourselves the most with, are other believers, are other people that have the same values, the same worldview, and the same thought process as you as well, right? They have the same God. They have the same God. The priority is not, oh, if we're both Filipino, we're both Asian, we're both this, we're both... The priority is that you have the same God. Ruth said to Naomi, your God will be my God, and your people will be my people. All right? Sanballat, look, again, the Samaritans are half Jewish. They're half Jewish, half Assyrian, but they have a different God, and that is the main difference. All right? I want you to, I'll show you later on why this is significant, but pay attention to the way that they mock behind closed doors. It says, hello? It says, what are these, what? Adjective, what is the modifier for the Jews here? What are these what? Pathetic, or feeble, all right? Now, what is something that is pathetic? What does pathetic mean? Pitiful, right? You know, there is a real danger in finding your identity in all the bad things that are happening to you. All right? People do this. People throw pity parties for themselves. All they do is complain. All they do is talk about, oh, I don't have enough money for this. I am fighting with all my friends. My family is treating me this way. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's so hard at work. School is so difficult. All these things. Now, all of these things could be true in your present life. But there's a problem when we align ourselves, the central part of our identity is reasons for people to feel sorry for us. Okay? When we talk about living a victorious Christian life, one of the key words there is victorious. All right? Because if we always align ourselves with how pitiful we are, we always want people to feel sorry for us. We want people to say, oh, it's okay. Let me do this for you. Let me help you out with this. If we always are doing that, and we instead of, so there's beauty in worship and being able to cry out to the Lord. Remember Isaiah, when God speaks to him, he says, cry out loudly, don't hold back. There's beauty in being able to cry out to the Lord and giving him everything, because really you while the scriptures tells us to bear one another's burdens, it doesn't really push believers though to to trust in others and trust in man in surrendering their burdens to each other. We surrender our burdens to God, and then God will speak to other believers, and God will soften the hearts of others in order to help bear each other's burdens. But really, first instance of any bad thing happening in your life, your first call should be the Lord. Your first call should be God. All right? Why? Because we should not be in the habit of... you ever notice that in movies, especially the ones that win awards, they like to have a lot of crying scenes, right? They like to have a lot of scenes that cause you to have an emotional reaction, to tear jerk. DJ and I watched a movie last night, and as we were watching it, anytime there's like an emotional scene, I turn to my sister. I want to see, is she going to cry? What's going to happen? What's going to happen here? But there's a reason why a lot of movies, they try to have that, because that type of stuff, it gets attention, and it can be intoxicating. Even as a minister of the gospel, a lot of times ministers, what they'll try to do is, they'll get really close and they'll start slowing down their cadence. And they'll speak like this. And then they'll start telling a really emotional story, which half of it could not even be true. But they think that if they can get the people to shed a tear, then the Holy Spirit will move among them and something great will happen. All right? That's all emotionality. That's all solical. The truth is, for some reason as humans, it becomes intoxicating when people give us attention, when people give us their emotion, when people cry out to us, when we say something to someone and someone cries, in the same way that we love it when we say something and someone laughs. There's something that becomes intoxicating when we're able to elicit an emotion from others. And so a lot of people, whether they realize it or not, they become addicted to telling everyone their sad story. I remember this was very much a culture for a lot of the undergrad kids at Trinity. And it's a Christian school. And one of the things that people love to do is share their testimony. And as you know, I've said many times, you should be sharing your testimonies with each other, because it helps build us up. It helps strengthen us. But one of the things they do is they practice sharing their testimonies in a way that gets others to cry, gets others to feel for them. I remember one time I was sitting outside of my guitar teacher's office waiting for my guitar lesson. And there was this girl who came up to me and she said hi, and she's like, I want to share to you my testimony. I just have to tell you everything that's been going on. And as much as she said testimony, there was nothing victorious about her story. It was just about how she's suffering really bad and everyone's hurting her because she's a believer, and all the different struggles she has and mental health and things like that. And I think she was expecting me to cry or have some sort of emotional reaction or to build some connection there. And then I remember she paused after she was done telling her sad story, and then she said, I think it's only fair that because I shared so much of my life, that now you share your story. I'm thinking, what are you talking about? You think I owe you something? You think I owe you a story? You think I owe you some sort of thing that will cause you to tear up, that will cause you to cry? One of my close friends, he moved away yesterday, moved to Providence, and on one of our last meals together, he said, John, tell me, what's something about me that you don't think you'll ever find in another friend? I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, what's something that you're going to cry about when I leave? I'm thinking, does it look like I'm crying right now? Now, I'm going to miss him, and I do miss him, right? He's my friend. But at the same time, I don't think that we as believers should be relishing in trying to cry and trying to do all these things all the time. Why? Because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So if all you're doing is trying to elicit emotional, sad reaction, then that shows that at the core of your heart, the thing that you're attracted to is sadness. And as we sang earlier, we're supposed to be trading our sorrows for what? Joy. Not trading our sorrows for more sorrows, right? Don't be addicted to these sad stories and sad things. But look at the way that the enemy talks about these Jews. They also talk about them as pathetic, as feeble, as insignificant, as a sob story, right? What are these pathetic Jews doing? Now, when you see someone and you see all these terrible things happening in their lives, what do they say? They look down at them and they have no hope for what could possibly happen. Can they restore it by themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they ever finish it? Can they bring these burnt stones back to life from the mounds of rubble? They look down at them and they say, look, all that's happened in the history of the Jews is they keep being torn down more and more and more. They are pathetic. What is the use of them? It's so that we can look at them and that we can cry. One of the videos that, speaking of being addicted to emotional reactions, one of the videos that I enjoy watching online sometimes, and I think I kind of gave a hint at this the other week, is, sad videos of animals being rescued. And you see like a little dog and he's growing maggots out of his hair and he's been abandoned and someone's abused him. You're like, oh, it's so sad. I don't know why. I don't know why it's so intoxicating. But I look at that dog and I don't expect anything great out of that dog. Sure, someone can rescue it, someone can take care of it, someone can comb out the maggots, but I'm not looking at that dog and thinking, wow, it's going to win some competition or do something great, right? Now, the reason why we should avoid talking about ourselves and centering our lives on our trauma and on the worst parts of what happened to our lives is because that's what the enemy does. And you don't want to speak about yourself the same way that the enemy speaks about you. It's a really bad strategy. You don't want to talk about yourself the same way that the devil talks about you. Stop calling yourself a failure. Why? Because that's what the devil calls you. He calls you a failure. That's what the devil calls you. The devil calls you fatherless. The devil calls you an orphan. The devil calls you all of these things. The devil calls you lonely. But what does God say? God says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So if all you do is relish in, I'm so lonely, I have no one, all of this, you are speaking about yourself the same exact way that the enemy is speaking about you. If all you talk about is how everyone hates Christians, listen to the way that the media talks about us. They literally say the exact same thing. They say, look at these people. No one likes them. No, the way that they talk about them, it's the same exact way. And you should not be talking about yourself, and you should not be talking about fellow believers the same way that the enemy talks about them. Because then we begin to see ourselves as small when God is opening up our eyes to see that we can do something big. Even Tobiah the Ammonite, who was beside him, he said, indeed, even if a fox climbed up what they were building, he would break down the stone wall. So Nehemiah prays to God and says, Lord, everyone is speaking bad about us. Everyone speaks about us as if we can't do anything. Why? Because we're a people who have been led into captivity, and Nehemiah says, let them be taken as plunder into a land of captivity. Don't cover their guilt or let their sin be erased from your sight, because they have angered the builders. They have angered the builders. So notice that the way that Nehemiah connects these things, he says that for the people who are bad-mouthing them, Nehemiah says, don't let their sin be erased from your sight. Why? Because Nehemiah knows the truth. Nehemiah knows that when God forgives us, anything is possible. All right? That's it. That's the implicit truth in what Nehemiah says. So actually what we know is the reason why we shouldn't be talking bad about ourselves is not because nothing bad has happened. The reason why we shouldn't be talking down about ourselves and who we are is not because we haven't failed, but it's because our God has completely forgiven us. All right? So we should be talking about ourselves Like the very fact that he has given us a task. God doesn't give tasks to the people that he doesn't approve. So the very fact that he gives you a task, that he has placed in your heart, a mission, his will in your life, means that he looks at you with approval. And we know that it's because he looks at us through the eyes of seeing his sacrificed son who has risen from the dead. And he approves you, and he wants you to continue on. Your sins are forgiven, completely wiped away. And that's why when Nehemiah talks about these people, God says, he's basically saying, Lord, look at them. They're not repentant. And remember, these people, the Samaritans, they're actively making sacrifices in their own temple, even as the Jews have not yet resumed sacrifices and things in their temple because the wall is still being built. The Samaritans are doing their service, and Nehemiah says, don't pay attention to them, Lord. Don't pay attention to their sacrifices, because sacrifices is what causes forgiveness in their eyes. And he says, don't pay attention to these things. Don't let their sin be erased. Because look at them. They're unrepentant. They are continuously talking bad about us. They are saying insults on us. Let them be taken away. Let them face the discipline that we face, because they are going against what you are building. And what does it say? What does Nehemiah lead the people to do? Verse 6 says, so we rebuilt the wall until the entire wall was joined up together into half its height. For the people had the will to keep on working. So what do you do when the enemy insults you? What do you do when people speak bad about you? You keep on working. We don't have the time to respond to every criticism that someone has against us. You simply don't have the time. You know why vengeance belongs to the Lord? Because you don't got enough time for that. Right? You're not some villain living in a lair in a cave plotting, oh, how am I going to get revenge? There's too much good work to be done. And so if the enemy speaks bad against you, what do? You keep on working. You keep on working. Because God's kingdom has to continue. If you are raising your family in the fear and admonition of the Lord, and all your relatives are mocking you, oh, why do you raise your kids so strict? Why do you raise them like that? Why are you teaching them to be alienated from their classmates and their friends? You're making them so different. What do? You keep on working. You keep on working. You keep on doing the same thing that the Lord has told you to do, because there comes a point that your wall starts to be built up. And why is this important? Because eventually the Samaritans then, they're going to see that the Jews keep on making progress until what happens? The entire wall is built up. And then, we know what ends up happening also, is that after the wall is built up, the temple sacrifices resume. And then what happens? Now, the Samaritans, as much as they were talking bad about the Israelites, there's no ignoring that testimony. And then they have to start comparing their own plight and their situation with their temple, which the Persians let them build, versus the Jewish temple. And now there's a comparison to see, well, we kept on talking bad about them, but now they're succeeding, right? And then the Jewish temple ends up becoming a testimony of who was on God's side and what chance that they had. All right? The moment that you give up and you let the words of the enemy get to you, then you also give up on showing the enemy what is the right way. All right? So let's say your relatives are speaking bad about the way that you are leading your family, because you're leading your family in the ways of righteousness, in the ways of the Lord. And then eventually you surrender. You compromise on the things that your relatives want you to compromise. Not only does that mean that you gave up on doing the will of the Lord, not only does that mean that you gave up on raising your children right, that means you gave up on showing those people that are bad-mouthing you the right way. You gave up on showing them the way of the Lord. This is why we don't give up. We don't give up not just for the sake of ourselves. We don't give up for the sake of those we are helping. And we don't give up, likewise, also for the sake of our enemies. and we don't give up for the sake of his name. And so we keep on going, and we keep on going, and we keep on going. But as Paul writes in his letters to Timothy, anyone who seeks to live a righteous life in Christ Jesus will experience persecution. So look, when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, Ammonites, Ashdodites heard that the repair to the walls of Jerusalem was progressing and that the gaps were being closed, so now they're closing the gaps, they're making the walls, these walls which were once rubble are beginning to look better, they became furious. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and throw it into confusion. And so we prayed to our God and stationed a guard because of them day and night. Day and night. Now, look at this. So, the people that's mentioned, the Samaritans, the Arabs, the Ammonites, the Ashdodites. Later on when we get to the book of Acts in the New Testament, these are the very same people who are coming to know the Lord. Right? They come to know the faith. So the trajectory of lots of people that you witness to is that before they come to see the light, they're going to get really, really mad. Right? Notice it's the same trajectory as the life of the Apostle Paul. Right? Before he came to know the Lord, he became furious at what the people were doing. It's the same as the different Pharisees who came to know the Lord. They would become furious. Notice even those who didn't end up on the other side and knowing the Lord, you see that when they hear the testimony, when it confronts them, there is this anger that hits them sometimes. Like with Agrippa. Remember when Herod Agrippa says, "How dare you try to make me become a Christian?" Because what it's doing is the testimony of what God is doing, not just the words, but the very sight of it, it cuts to the quick of people's hearts. It opens their eyes to the worst of themselves, and there's this innate anger that stirs up inside of them. And it's actually something that God is showing them and God is doing to them. And so sometimes they end up then, their hearts softening and they come to know the Lord, and sometimes they continue to do wickedness. But I want you to pay attention because we should not be unaware of the enemy's schemes, and we should not be unaware of what we can do to combat it. So, for the enemies, what they decide is that their plot against Israel, their plot against the Judeans, their plot against the wall building of Jerusalem is twofold. Number one, they will fight. Everyone say fight. And number two is confusion. Okay? Say confusion. So we have two things right here. First, they're attacking the body. All right? They're actually stationing soldiers, and they want to station night raids in order that they can start sabotaging the construction of the wall. All right? It is a very real thing. Now, today, we might not experience that from the troops of the enemy and from unbelievers as much here in the United States, although they very much experience it elsewhere. We might not experience it in terms of physically attacking us, although that is happening. All right, keep in mind that anti-Semitism and attacks on synagogues is at an all-time high. And I think perhaps the stupidest mayor in America, Mamdani, the more that he says things, he is fueling anti-Semitism and hate. And I don't know if you saw, one of the craziest things is this man, he just appointed a commission for appointing judges. And he put not one single Jewish lawyer in that commission. And there are 45% of all lawyers in New York are Jewish. And for him to appoint 18 people and not one Jew, it just shows how hateful this man is. And I'll say this, if there's any Christian who claims to understand things and they support this man, I simply just don't understand it. Because this man clearly, he hates God's people. He hates God's people. His wife, just as bad. His wife works in children's in different art circles, and the people they support Hamas. They support literal terrorists. I mean, I hope people see this stream and they understand, like, you should not support Hamas in any way or anything adjacent to Hamas. I have no problem saying that there literally is no genocide being committed by Israel against Gaza. I have no reservations about that. All right? People who are being confused into that, they are being deceived by the enemy. They're being deceived by the enemy. But what I'm saying is, what I'm getting to though, is one of the things that they're doing here in America is, although, and by the way, so him, and then him also having that public statement condemning Netanyahu, calling him a war criminal, it also coincides then with an increase of anti-Semitic attacks in New York. Okay? If there's one man that I really pray out of office quickly, it's that man. Fortunately, we know that the love of many will grow cold, and that people are so blind. There's something thick in their head. There's something wrong with it. I don't know. Can you imagine a mayor like that in the place where 9/11 happened? Okay, and it's not. So, anyways, persecution that's happening to us today. You should be aware, and you should be. You should be also aware of the attacks that the enemy has. If it's not necessarily on our physical body, right? If we don't necessarily have snipers shooting against us, attacks even on our property and our rights to protect our own things, that is another way of the enemy encroaching upon us. I really do believe that attacks on, like, even this increase of this idea of communism, one of Mamdani's recent appointments, and I think the reason why it's relevant is because New York City is probably the most important city in the United States in terms of influence. One of his most recent appointments is a woman who said that having private property is racist. Okay? And so the reason why this becomes a problem is because then, if Christians or anyone seems to be against what the government is doing, then the government will increasingly want to act on its right of eminent domain and take away what we have. Remember, the stories of eminent domain that we see in the scriptures is like stories of Ahab taking away Naboth's vineyard. And it's a wicked thing. All right? I really, like, you know, even if I have family who works for the government, I don't believe that the government has any right to take away any of my property. Okay? And what property do I own? I own nothing. I don't have it's just my parents' property. But I really do believe that. I really do believe that that is something that is happening in our midst today that we need to watch out for. We need to watch out for. Because the enemy is going after our person. One of the things that preceded, you know, I was speaking to this Jewish lawyer who wants to become a therapist, and one of the things he said was he is fully convinced, and this is why he's interested in allying with Christians and things. He's fully convinced that within the next 30 years, another Holocaust is possible. Why? Because the same patterns that are happening in the United States happened in Nazi Germany, in Poland, in all the places that Hitler controlled over. One of the very first things that the Jews suffered under Hitler's regime was their property started being taken away. Their shops were taken away, their houses, their homes. They were forced to live in ghettos. Now, before that happened, just so that you can see that it's not immediate, that we feel it in our bodies, before that happened, there was propaganda all over being done both by the private sector and by the government that would go against the Jewish people. They would have board games in which the enemies were Jews, and they were caricatures of long nose, and they were said to be taking over the world. So look at the way that the world talks about Christians, as if we're some sort of villains plotting against, doing all of these evil things. Sometimes it's laughable. But even the way that the media, the mainstream media, the positive media that we laugh at, that we go buy movie tickets to. We might think it's funny when they have jokes sometimes, but that is all on the road to persecution against our bodies. Okay? The enemy wants us dead, both physically and spiritually. All right? The enemy wants us dead. Make no mistake. Don't raise your kids thinking that the government is their friend, that the government has their best interests in heart. Our relationship as believers to the government is we submit because they're a way of limiting evil, but our ultimate loyalty is to God. I want to make that clear. Okay? Our ultimate loyalty is to God. And so the sooner that believers realize that, the sooner they'll be prepared for the persecution that is coming. Because remember, if we believe the scriptures, and I do believe that in this house we do, one of the ways that the enemy will attack believers is he will make it impossible for them to buy or sell. He will make it impossible for them to buy or sell unless they do what? Unless they receive the mark of the beast. So you see, even an attack on believers' abilities to both make wealth and to participate in the economy, that also is an attack on what? On our body, right? Because eventually that's the goal that we see in the depictions of the end times in Revelation, in Isaiah, and all of these different things in Ezekiel. Look, the way that education is happening. Now, if you're already in the education system, continue, get your degree, get these letters before it's too late. But they make it harder and harder for believers to be able to participate in the educational system, right? As a church in the Philippines, look, our school there is unaccredited. And as for now, we don't have any plans of being accredited. Why? Because we don't trust in the government of the Philippines enough to be righteous, and that the ways and the rules and regulations that they have would be righteous enough. So we decide that we're going to build up our own house, build up our own walls, just like the way that Nehemiah is doing it. Because we don't rely on them. Now, notice Nehemiah got approval from the kings of Persia. He gets approval from these things. So he uses the government as a tool. Okay? The government is something that is helpful for limiting evil through the police, through soldiers, through military, helping eliminate as much deaths as possible. But even then, right now, it's not even functioning in that way, or the way it should be. But it is also a tool. Be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. I really believe this. Every politician that you vote for, that I vote for, you need to learn to view them as tools. Okay? It sounds kind of like harsh because they're people, but view them as tools, as means to an end. Because we have work to be done, and our primary witness in this earth is not political. It's not through the politicians. We don't put our trust in these people. Not a single one of them. So there's this attack on our bodies, which I really believe is happening in our midst today, and it's leading to that even more so. Just like they said, we're going to plan these things. We're going to plan these riots. We're going to do what we can to attack the Jews. And then it says, and also throw it into confusion. So, there's both an attack on our bodies, but also an attack on our minds. So the enemy wants to make it difficult for us to live, but he also wants to change the way that we think. In the same way that Paul tells us to be transformed by the renewing of our mind, the enemy wants our mind to degenerate, to deteriorate, to start thinking of ourselves in the way that he thinks of us. Look at the book of Isaiah. We're not going to turn there right now, even though we've been going there a lot. But look at how often God tells Israel, forget the shame of your youth. You will remember your sins no longer. Why? Because he's training them. You have to start thinking of yourself as redeemed. But the enemy wants us to think that way. He wants us to focus on all the bad things that are happening to us. Verse 10, notice, what does it say? In Judah, so not in Samaria. First, the slander happened in Samaria, in the Samaritan lands, among their colleagues. And then they send gossips over to Judah to say this: the strength of the laborer fails. Since there is so much rubble, we will never be able to rebuild the wall. How many of you can identify the difference between someone from Ethiopia and someone from Ghana? No? Some of you can barely tell the difference between someone from China and someone from Korea. It's true. Okay? When you go to Israel, likewise, it's difficult sometimes to tell the difference between an Arab and a Jew. Anti-Semites like to say that the Jews in Israel are all just white people. That's just simply not true. It's difficult to tell the difference. And why do I say this? Because the Samaritans, likewise, where are they descended from? From the Israelites. They're Israelite and Assyrian. So, if they were to go into the land of Judea, if they were going to the land of Jerusalem, and they started spreading gossip, who would know? Who would know, right? Who would know? Sometimes I can barely tell the difference between Filipinos and Vietnamese. Okay, it's true. Sometimes, like, I go up to someone like, "Are you Filipino?" And they're like, "No, I'm Hmong." It's difficult, right? It's difficult. You can't just rely on your eyes to be able to see these things, right? You have to be able to have discernment. Okay. By the way, that is also one of the reasons why I believe that as believers, it's important that even visually, we maintain our distinctives. All right? Now, you can have a discussion as to tattoos and, we see all these ministers with tattoos and we see all these people. But one of the things that I think is beautiful about believers keeping themselves clean and not looking like the world is so that it will be harder for the world to blend into us. Okay? So that we will make no mistake. I think it's good that we continue to dress modestly and in a way that honors the Lord, because we want to maintain that distinctive so that we will not be confused. Now, I'm not saying don't judge people by the way that they look. That is the opposite of what I'm saying. All right? In fact, John the Baptist, he looked crazy. And if you dress up like John the Baptist, please don't do that here, okay? All right? Wear normal clothes. But what I'm saying is that even the way that we speak, the way that we sound, all right, it's going to be a problem if all of a sudden, worship music starts to, the way that people lead become more and more of a spectacle. That they have the same fireworks, they have the same pyrotechnics, the same lights and things like that, and then you can't make the distinction anymore. Or when believers, they start having all this music that doesn't even mention the name of Jesus because they want it to be more palatable to unbelievers. And what does that do? That allows the world to blend in more and make it easier to disguise themselves as the angel of light. Okay? There's a certain distinction that we should be able to have. There's a reason why in the scriptures, one of the things that's forbidden for the Jewish people is mixing certain types of fabrics. Why? Because there were some fabrics that were meant for the holy priesthood and for the ephod, and some things that were for the common people. And God wanted there to be no blending. Even when it came to the anointing oil that was on the priests, no one outside was supposed to copy that oil, because God wanted to make it super clear who was a priest and who was not. Not because he relishes in separation and he enjoys condemnation, but because he wants to make it clear what is true and what is false. It's one of the reasons why there's so many dietary laws in the scriptures as well. Because you enter into a space and everyone is eating pork, and then one person is not eating pork, then it's easy to identify which one of them is a Jew, which one of them is an Israelite. And then you can ally yourself with them in that space, in the ancient world. Not here in this house. Everyone here eats pork. Almost everyone. Sometimes not Tita Jo, right? I don't know. She's back and forth on that. Tita Jo always tells me, like, at least once a year she's staying away from pork. But then when we have celebrations, I always see her eating pork. It's okay. But the idea is we need to be, we need to maintain our distinction as believers. I don't like it when believers start casually saying bad words. It's like, and they say, oh, it's just words, it's nothing. But then guess what? Now, if someone wants to sneak in, there's not much change that they have to do. No repentance, right? Even, you know, I have a friend who works with a ministry called Red Frogs. Have you guys heard of Red Frogs? No. Red Frogs is a ministry based out in Australia. And they go to where students are having spring break vacation, especially college students, because they get wild, and they minister to them there. So Red Frogs was ministering during Lollapalooza this weekend, which is a huge music festival, and people are dressed all scantily. They're doing all sorts of things. And so my friends in Red Frogs, they went out there, and they were handing out people water. Well, they weren't in the festival. They were outside of it. They were handing out people water. They were praying for them. But they made sure that their volunteers were also dressed modestly and normally, so that there could be a distinction between them. Okay? Now, it's not to condemn others, but it's to set ourselves apart as holy. Because, look, remember, Ezra came back to Jerusalem because he needed to teach them again how to live. They built the temple, but what were they not doing? They were not doing sacrifices. They were not following it. So, that means that the other laws as well, the Jews weren't really doing. So when the Samaritans and the Arabs and the Ashdodites and the different people, they came in to spread gossip, it's easy for them to disguise themselves among the people. You don't know who's who. Who is Jewish and who is not? Who is following God and who is not? Everyone is mixed up. It is one big salad bowl. All right? It's one big... And so look, what does it say? In Judah, it was said, the strength of the laborer fails, since there is so much rubble, and we will never be able to rebuild the wall. And verse 11 says, and our enemies said, they won't realize it until we're among them. They won't realize it. They were confident, look, we can disguise ourselves among the people and spread as much gossip as we can, and the people won't realize it. And then once we're integrated enough, what can we do? It says here, we can kill them and stop the work. So confusion is actually a pathway into attacking the body. If we can get Christians and believers to agree with the same things that the world agrees on, then we can go ahead and attack the body. And it will be too late before they even realize it. An attack on your mind is also an attack on your body. And this is why we should be watchful of the things that we consume. We should be watchful of the things we listen to. We should be watchful of the things that we believe, because if we start thinking the same as them, they can easily deceive us. How many believers They fell for the trap of dating an unbeliever and even falling into sexual sin because they kept on saying, well, they believe basically the same things as me. We agree on so many things. They're basically a good person. But if you hold to the standards of what the Bible says as to what we believe, it's actually a pretty high standard. It's instructions that come straight from heaven. And so you are not even comparing the unbeliever's beliefs to the right thing. You're comparing it to your own beliefs. And you've become so compromised in your mind that you think, because you think the same as the unbeliever, that you must have the same values. When what you should have been doing is comparing their values to the values of Jesus. And if you compare their values to the values of Jesus, and you say their values are the same as yours, then you know what the next step is? You better compare your values to the values of Jesus. Because if you have drifted so far away from what Jesus thinks, that you look basically the same as unbeliever, but you're comfortable with it, then there's a problem there. There's a problem there. And look, we don't operate as individuals. We operate as a body. And when you make yourself vulnerable to the attacks of the enemy by compromising, I want you to think about this. You're not just making yourself vulnerable to the enemy. You're making the entire body vulnerable. Because naturally, as fellow believers, as people who are family with one another, we love each other. Right? We love each other. And that's why when poison comes into the body, it becomes easy to spread because we feel sorry for each other. We feel sympathetic. We compromise on these things. We say, oh, well, this believer, and I feel so close. And then the poison spreads, the poison spreads, the poison spreads. We need to make sure that we make that distinction. And then we have to protect our mind by continuously reminding ourselves of who God says we are. So it says in Judah, this is the main source of the gossip. What do they say? First of all, they say, the strength of the laborers fail. So, first piece of gossip is we are weak. Okay? Look at your neighbor. Find a neighbor to look at. And you tell them, you are not weak. You are not weak. You are not weak. They're not weak. You're not weak. Because the enemy puts that seed in that your strength is always going to fail. Now look, as believers, we know about the theology that in our weakness, His strength is made perfect. Okay? We understand how that works. And so the truth is, because of His strength, we are not weak. But if you let that lie continue, and we always focus weakness, 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 we're susceptible to the gossip. The next one is, there is so much rubble. So they say, oh, look at our strength. It's this little. And then look at the rubble. It's so big. How long does it take to wipe up a spill? How big is the spill? Let's say that you drop a cup of milk on the floor. And then all you have to do to clean, all you have to mop it up is a mop. How long does it take to soak up? Depends on the material. Actually, let me use something better. Let's say one of these tiles is covered in dust. Maybe sawdust. Maybe there was construction. So how are we going to clean up the dust? Vacuum. How long will it take to vacuum? One of these things. Seconds. Right? What if we have 2 tiles covered in dust? How long will it take? 4 seconds. It's really not a significant difference. You know, even if we had 10 tiles covered in dust, it really is not going to take long. Why? Because that's the nature of a vacuum. All right? Vacuums are really strong. We're not, like when the cleaners come and there's garbage on the floor, we don't give them straws and we tell, okay, bend down and you don't, that's not, we have vacuums here in this house. Okay? So what maybe a long time ago would take a long time before vacuums existed, we have vacuums. And it doesn't matter if this whole floor is covered in dust, it's not going to take too long to vacuum the thing. Because the vacuum has so much power that it sucks up all the dust. Okay? But, what if, you know how does a vacuum operate? I mean, how do you use it? How do you use it? Thank you. How do you use the vacuum? You put it over the thing and you push. You push. Right? It has wheels. Right? It guides through and because you perceive the vacuum for what it is and that's how you use it. What if there's a big pile of dirt and then the way that you use the vacuum is you set it up, you plug it in, and then you remove the hose and then you bend down and you start going like that. It's going to take much longer. Why? Because you don't understand that the power of the vacuum is that it has the much bigger hole to suck things in, and then you can just push it around. But if you just see it as the little hose that's the attachment, it's going to take you much longer because you're going to be down on your knees. You don't appreciate the technology that you have, and so you use it in the most inefficient way possible. One of the stories of my trauma as a child, since we're talking about trauma, was one time Kuijet and Natasha were going to take us out to watch WALL-E. And I remember my mom said that before we go watch WALL-E, I had to clean the kitchen floors, right? Something about Filipino parents. How do they want you to clean the floors? You could have the most advanced mop in the world. You could have a vacuum mop combination thing. You could have whatever, but at the end of the day, the way your parents want you to clean, get a basahan, get on your hands and knees, and scrub the floor. And so something that could take a short amount of time, it takes forever, right? Because they want you to, see, I see some of you resisting, and in your minds you're thinking, because that's the right way. That's because you're Filipino moms. Okay, but then it takes longer because you're doing things in the most inefficient way. In the most inefficient way. Oh, here's another challenge. Did you know that for dishwashers, the most efficient way? Yeah, hand washing? What's the most efficient way if you have a dishwasher? You take the dishes and you put it in the dishwasher. And if you do it properly, you put it in the dishwasher, you put the pod in, you turn it on, and what will it do? It will clean the dishes. How many times have we loaded the dishwasher downstairs? You guys are in cleaning ministry, right? How often? The thing is, we clean things pretty quickly, right? We don't leave things overnight. Things don't get crusted. So how quickly do we clean things downstairs? We lack trust. We lack trust in the dishwasher. So we're like, let's scrub these things. Okay? Let's scrub these things and we'll okay. But what does it say here? Then, because we look at the strength and we say, oh, it's so little, and then we see that the rubble is so much, we look at ourselves and we don't picture ourselves as having the strength of God, and then we look at the troubles, it rhymes with rubble, that's unintentional by me, but we look at it and it's so much and we think, oh, it's impossible for us to conquer this thing. It's impossible. And so what happens? We're paralyzed and we end up doing nothing. We end up doing nothing. I don't know why, but sometimes it happens also with little kids. You ever notice that sometimes a little kid will make a big spill, and as an adult, it will take you It's quick to clean it up. But sometimes a little kid makes a big mess, and what do they start doing? They start crying, right? They start crying. They drop something. They drop cereals on the ground. Although with Johnny, if you drop cereal on the ground, he'll just start picking up the cereal, and then he'll want to eat it. But if you drop cereal on the ground, you drop something on the ground, the kid will start crying. But as an adult, you're like, it really doesn't take that much to clean up. It's just like one of my siblings, when he was much younger, I won't reveal who. Yeah, I won't reveal who. I don't want to jeopardize his reputation as a lawyer when he grows up, okay? So when he was much younger, whenever he would make a spill, and we would ask him, James, clean it up. We would say, clean it up. He would get so mad. I don't know if you remember James when he was younger and he would get mad. He would like ball his fist up and say, and then he wouldn't want to clean it. Why? Because it really does look like a lot to someone who doesn't know that it really is easy. And for us, if we don't truly understand and comprehend with our minds and with our spirit the power of God in our lives, then every single mess is going to look like too much rubble. Now look, when did they start this gossip? They started the gossip when the people were already halfway finished. They were already halfway finished with the wall. They are closing the gaps. But then that's the crazy thing about the way the human mind works. You could have already made so much progress, but then a little gossip will paralyze you and stop you from doing the right thing. I mean, one of the great sadness of people walking away from the faith is we think they've done so much already. Like, you've come so far, why stop now? A little gossip, it ruins the whole thing. As Jesus said, a little leaven, what does it do? It changes the whole batch. A little poison. Now, this is what they do, and this is what they say, and they say, everywhere, when the Jews who lived nearby arrived, they said to us, time and again, everywhere you turn, they attack us. We have no idea who's on our side and who's not, and we turn somewhere and then people are attacking us and they're attacking our bodies. They're stopping us from building the wall. Now, I want you to pay attention to the immediate way that Nehemiah responded. Verse 9, it says, so we prayed to our God. Everyone say prayed. And then stationed a guard because of them day and night. Notice it's a twofold thing. One, they prayed to their God. Prayer is one of the most powerful weapons that we have. And not only does it connect our spirit to the Lord, but it also strengthens our minds. And especially when we pray out the scriptures, we remember who He is and who He says we are. But you don't just pray. You also station a guard at night. In the same way that the enemy attacks our mind and attacks our bodies, we also respond by fortifying our mind and also taking practical steps to do things as well. All right? Like, this is why we should be shrewd with the way that we deal with our finances, even with the way that we deal with our health. Right? Making sure that we're eating the right things. These are actually all practical ways that you can make it harder for the enemy to attack your body. All right? Don't do stupid things. Okay? I'm learning that more and more as I grow older. I cannot just try out any stunts or tricks that I want to. Otherwise, I will get hurt. I fell down the stairs and I hurt myself so bad. Yeah. You can't. You just can't. There's too much important work to be done. I can't play Power Rangers all the time and hit pots and pans against I don't know. I can't. But there's practical ways. So we both fortify our minds and we also protect our bodies. We also protect our bodies. we do these things. You station the guard at night. And even as a body, collectively together, you pray for one another, but you also, in practical ways, keep each other accountable. You check on each other. You say, hey, where were you the other day? Why did you miss surface? What happened here? Are you okay? We pray for one another, but we also do the very practical things. Because praying, we only pray to God. We don't pray to each other. So you can pray for someone without ever even talking to them. But we don't just pray for one another. We don't just pray. We also take practical steps because we're acting out in faith. The one who has faith but does not work, their faith is dead. So what does it say? In the practicality, it says here, verse 13, so I stationed people behind the lowest sections of the wall at the vulnerable areas. I stationed them by families with their swords, spears, and their bows. Okay? So first of all, as a body, we should be protective of our most vulnerable. Now, in a very practical sense, oftentimes the most vulnerable to attacks of the mind, who are they? It's our children, right? It's the new believers. We should watch out for those who are fresh in the body and for those who are fresh out the womb as well, right? For those who are young in mind, who are still developing, who are learning these things, I very much respect it. You know, sometimes we'll, when we were kids growing up, we're older than other people, and we say, do you want to watch this thing? And maybe it has guns and stuff, and they say, oh, our parents don't let us watch that. Now, my dad let us watch a lot of, like, violent things because for him it was comedy because he grew up seeing actual people be stabbed, so he's like, that's not realistic. But then when children would tell us, like, oh, we're not allowed to watch that, I actually respect that, right? I respect that. Why? Because their parents are seeking to protect them. They're seeking to protect them. And so it's important that when it is kids, you are protecting them, you are making sure that they are exposed to the right things, and same as new believers. You know what the problem is? Sometimes someone becomes a new believer, and then immediately they start being introduced to all sorts of like weird conversations and different teachings, when really what they should be focusing on is the scriptures, the simplicity of the gospel, right? We seek to build a firm foundation first. We want to know the simplicity of the gospel before we get into debates, before we get into all these discussions, but we want to pride ourselves and make ourselves look so fancy and so smart, but it's important that we protect the vulnerable. So Nehemiah, he looked out which parts of the wall are most vulnerable, and we will station people there to protect the walls. As a body, we should be careful, especially what we say around the children of this house. Parents, you should be very careful about the way that you act in front of your children. Now, the best way to do that is don't live a dual life. The way that you act in front of your children should be the same way that you act outside of your children. But be very, very careful. Be very careful. Why? Because vulnerable is vulnerable. And we wait until we close those gaps and we build it further and we make it difficult for the enemy to infiltrate. And look at the way that that it says here. It says, what does it say? It says, I stationed them by families. By families. So again, it goes to what we were talking about this morning. The families in this house, you guys can actually act as units helping others. All right? Helping others. Parents, when you have a heart to help someone, involve your children in some way. Have your, I do think that, of course, it had to do with practicality and the job of my mom. But one of the reasons why the children that my mom babysat were able to come to church so often was because my mom used us as kind of bait to bring them to the church, because They wanted to play with us. They wanted to hang out with us. And so they were able to come to church in that way. Your families, there's so much potential within a strong family unit to do so much for the work of the gospel. And if you can get your family to have the same heart for the same people, for the same things, there's just beautiful things that can happen there. After I made an inspection, I stood up and said to the nobles. Last time we saw the nobles, what were the nobles doing? Nothing. Nothing. Not even lifting a finger. If we go even, if we continue along and continue to look, it says that even the officers, they are joining in. But what I want you to see there is that Nehemiah, just because the nobles didn't participate in the beginning of the building of the wall, they're still Israelites, and he doesn't give them an excuse. So he keeps on addressing them. He keeps on addressing them. That's why the ministry of the word is so important, especially the way that we have it this time right here. Because, or even Sunday mornings and now, look, whether or not you believe in the mission of Lion's Heart, you're hearing the same words as everyone else. Families, your children are not all going to be on the same level all the time as their faith. But there are some things that's important for everyone to hear, for everyone to remember, to everyone to know that your stance is on. We don't compromise these things, and we make sure that the word is continuously. And this is the message that he tells the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people. Don't be afraid, and remember the great and awe-inspiring Lord. So if we remember God, what will happen? We will not be afraid. And then we will be able to fight for our countrymen, our sons and daughters, our wives, and our home. You standing up for your faith will benefit not just each other and this country, it will benefit your families, it will benefit your home. When the enemies heard that we knew their scheme and that God had frustrated it, and that every one of us had returned to the work on the wall, and from that day, half of my men did the work, while the other half held spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers supported all the people of Judah who were rebuilding the wall. The laborers who carried the loads worked with one hand and held a weapon with the other. And each of the builders had his sword strapped around his waist as he was building. And the trumpeter was beside me. I just want you to see there also that, like, the way that we do church ministry in compartmentalizing people and saying, oh, this person is only one thing. Even the way that people teach about the fivefold ministry and saying, oh, this person is only a teacher, only a prophet, only an apostle, only a whatever. There's 5 of them. Okay. Notice that here, the people are just filling in what needs to be done. If you're a builder, you're also going to be a guard. You're going to be working that hammer while staying strapped with the sword. Okay? While staying strapped with the sword. You're able to do these things, you might as well. And that's the same thing for us. We need to learn to both work on building the kingdom of God and then defending against the enemies that are trying to attack us. Because if we're focusing all our energy on the enemies, what's going to happen to the building? It's going to stay stagnant. If all we do is talk about the world and talk about how much the world is evil and the world is going bad, and we're just telling and giving warnings, making sure those things, what's going to happen? This congregation is not going to grow. We're not going to build. But if all we're doing is talking about, bringing more people in, the more faces, the better, all these things, the seeker-sensitive way, then what's going to happen? We're not going to be protected from the outside. You can do both. The problem is that it's easier to just choose one thing and stick to it. And that is the way that movements die. That's the way that churches die. That's the way that people fail to finish the work that needs to be done. Each of the builders had a sword strapped around his waist while he was building, and the trumpeter was beside me. And then again, he speaks to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, and he says, the work is enormous and spread out, and we are separated far from one another along the wall. There is so much work to be done. Wherever you hear the trumpet sound, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. There's no such thing as phone alerts when people need help. So literally, you could be building on any section of the wall, and then the Samaritans and the Arabs, they come in and start attacking a section. And so then someone will blow the trumpet there, and there's instructions for everyone then to come on and gather around and help solve the crisis. There are some things that really the whole body needs to come together and see that it's a crisis and work together. But that's the way that, look, even the way that this says is, it says, so we continued the work while half the men holding spears from daybreak until the stars came out. And at that time I also said to the people, let everyone and his servants spend the night inside Jerusalem. So they're calling people from all over Judea, stay in the city, because they need to get this job done quickly, so that they can stand guard by night and work by day. And I, my brothers, my servants, and the men of the guard with me, never even took off our clothes. Each carried his weapon, even when washing. That means even when they're cleaning up themselves. They're never dropping their guard. Now, this is not the way that they live forever. This is just until the wall is being completed. This is when there's a sense of urgency. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how urgent is this time? Okay? How urgent is this time? Because the reason why it's everyone coming together, the reason why everyone is ready to defend, and everyone is ready to help out, it's because they truly believe the time is urgent. Because they can perceive the enemy and they see their people are being killed, they see their people are being attacked. If there's anyone in this house who is not contributing to the house, if whenever there is newcomers, there's only a few people who come in, who go to introduce themselves, to welcome them in, if whenever there is an issue of sin, we have to wait a long time before someone brings it up and says, hey, we need to fix this thing, then what does that tell us? There is no sense of urgency. There is no sense of urgency. So the question we have to ask ourselves then is, do we need a sense of urgency? And if we listen to the words of Jesus, the answer is clearly yes. The time is running out. The time is short. And the Lord is coming back soon. Look, we as believers, we are building up the walls. We are closing the gaps. And the enemy can't stand it, because the enemy wants his own temple. The enemy wants people to worship him. They want to worship the statue that speaks. And so he's sending in his attacks. And he's relying on the believers to not work until the stars are out, but to be asleep, to not pay attention, to ignore all the warning signs. And if we ignore the warning signs, then the wall will not get built, and the work will not be completed. It's just as simple as that. So, wake up. Wake up, sleeper. Lift your head, and what? Let the light of Christ shine upon you. There is so much work to be done. If you're being useless, stop being useless. If you're being useful, find more ways that you can be useful. Okay? We're building something together here. Okay? And if you think that there is so much trouble, remember that there is so much power that is available to you. Okay? Because there is a lot of rubble. There is a lot of trouble. But we got like a huge vacuum that can take care of all of this stuff. All right? God is strong and his word is true. Let's all stand.